This is Show Up as a Leader, a show from People Forward Network, helping you maximize your positive impact on the world by becoming your best, fully authentic self. Hey everyone, it is Rosie. I'm just going to tell you right now, there is so much goodness and insights and ahas that is jam-packed into this conversation that I had with the amazing Andrea Sampson. She is the CEO and founder of Talk Boutique, and she's got an incredible gift of helping us understand our mindsets, helping us understand our stories, and thinking differently about what it means to be a thought leader. And much like we say that leadership is not about a title or a role, the way that Andrea looks at thought leadership is at its core, how do we use our voice to create impact? And we can do that one-on-one with someone in our personal life. We can do that with our colleagues. We can do that on a broad scale with millions of people and everything in between. So you're going to want to listen to this of how she talks about rethinking what thought leadership actually is, why we all could benefit from showing up as a thought leader in our life. And she talks about these three key mindsets of how we show up as a thought leader and where we might get in our way with those mindsets. She talks a lot about how we combined our influence and our knowledge and how we have a difference. And we just have such a good human conversation around how we can all use our voice, have a different impact, rethink what it means to influence. I just think there's tons and tons you're going to get out of this. Plus, you're going to want to listen for it and go to the show notes because she has a free storytelling kit that she is offering for all of our listeners. Take a listen. All right, Andrea, I am really, really looking forward to having this, what I'm assuming is going to be a fun geek out session with you. So thank you for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much, Rosie. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Likewise. Well, we're going to dive right in because there's so much we need to unpack. And I want to start for anyone who is listening who maybe it's your first time or it's been a hot minute. I want to start with how we define leadership and why we call the show Show Up as a Leader, because I think it segues into your work so brilliantly. And we define leadership is maximizing our positive impact on the world by doing two things. First, we've got to do work to become our best, fully authentic self and support those around us to break past barriers and step into their greatness. And I know that's a mouthful, but it's really recognizing that leadership never has been and never will be about a title or a role or power or responsibility. It is about a mindset and it is about a set of behaviors. And I feel like in this world, every single one of us has an opportunity, and I usually say a responsibility, to show up as a leader in their life. And why I wanted to start with that is that your work is around thought leadership. And I think some people might be listening going, well, I'm not a thought leader. I don't want to be a thought leader. I have no desire to be a thought leader. Just like we have people who say, well, I'm not a leader. I don't want to be a leader. But it's shifting the mindset around what do we actually mean by that? And why is it so important to rethink that? So talk to me about your work. And we're going to start with the thought leadership of like, what is it? What is it not? And how do we leverage it better?
Absolutely. And I think I love that you started off with the mindset because that's exactly what I say about thought leadership. Thought leadership isn't something that a title you give yourself. It's how you're seen in the world. And what I always say, thought leadership is really about using your voice to create impact. And so, we align so beautifully, right? When we think about thought leaders, and I think this is a thing that, as I've done the work that I've been doing, and, I've had my company for almost 10 years working with some of the smartest people in the world. But here's the thing. Many of those people, don't consider themselves thought leaders either. But what they are doing and what they step into and why they come to work with me is because they recognize that they've got a message that needs to be heard because the work they're doing is important. And so when we think about thought leaders, the problem with that word or that term is that we tend to think about leaders of countries or leaders of companies or leaders of industry. These are people that have these big, important roles. And yeah, they are thought leaders. There's no question there. But here's the issue is that, first of all, when I look at those people, very few of them look like me or you, Rosie, and that's a problem because thought leaders are those who create and co-create our future based on the needs of those they represent. Well, if the voices of those they represent are never getting to those very influential thought leaders, then how do they know what to create for our future? And so when we step into our own thought leadership, and that could be thought leadership within our family, or thought leadership within our community, or thought leadership within our team, or thought leadership within our industry, where you are a thought leader is less important, that you are using your voice in a way that is contributing to a co-created vision of our future. And I think that's the piece that we all forget, that if we're not using our voice, if we are not contributing to that conversation, then where is the voice, or where is the representation of us and those who look like us and sound like us and believe the things that we believe in that future? And there's just not enough diversity in our thought leadership today. And so for me, it is not just about being a thought leader. It is about being a thought leader who thinks a little differently because of the culture you come from, because of the background you have, because of, the way you look, because of the choices you make. These are all ways that we are diverse. As a blue-haired aging woman, I am also neurodiverse. And so I represent many different diverse groups. So my voice is important. Now, am I the only voice in those conversations? Of course not. I want others to be adding their voice to mine, who are then adding it to the lawmakers, the governance makers, all of those people. But if we're not speaking, our thought leadership is never getting out there.
Oh my gosh, I just want to do like a mic drop. And there's so much in that I love, but you said something twice that I wrote down that is so important, but are we using our voice to have an impact? And I do think that for anyone who at any level has been marginalized, like as a woman, 100% happens, right? People who pick it, neurodivergent, color, different race, the list goes on and on. Anyone that has ever been in a group where you've been to any extent marginalized or feel like your voice doesn't matter, we hold ourselves back. And we have one of our self-limiting programs, we refer to that as the mime, but it's like, I don't think my voice matters, so I'm not going to speak up in this meeting. I'm not going to speak up with my partner, with my friend. And there's so many different ways that we don't speak up for a variety of reasons that we can certainly unpack. And then there's it's not safe for me to speak up. My workplace has not created the community where I can speak up or where they actually want me to. It's lip service. They really don't want dissenting opinions. It goes on and on. So it's at work and outside of work. And so I love that, because if we miss those opportunities, like we can make an impact in, like you said, in our relationship, we can make an impact with one person, with a group of people in our community. And I think that is so critical, because we feel like our voice doesn't matter, or we feel like, who cares, or someone else has already said that, so I'm just noise. There's all this narrative that we create. So let's talk about, you've talked about it being a mindset, like, yes, I can make an impact, but what are the aspects, if you will, or the qualities of that mindset that we want to have when we think about using our voice and being a thought leader in our lives?
Yeah. So, when I sat down and did this work, and I did a lot of thinking about thought leadership, because I work with so many people who are doing the work of thought leaders. And what I noticed was that people come to me with sort of a couple of different things. So, first of all, there's the question of how confident are you in the knowledge you have? Whatever it is that you have a belief about, or that you're an expert in, or that you feel like you can contribute towards. What is that knowledge base that you feel confident in? How confident are you in that? So number one is confidence in the knowledge that you bring. The second piece to it, and this is a really important one, is your ability, or your, I guess, even comfort level with having influence. And what that really means is, how comfortable are you going into the emotional connection of your knowledge set? So how do you emotionally connect with the audiences that you speak with, or the people? Audiences are anything from, right now, you and me, to a boardroom full of people, to an auditorium full of people, to millions of people on the other side of a camera. Audiences are an audience of one to an audience of, unlimited numbers. But how comfortable are you in wielding your influence with that audience? And those two things become the determiners of the mindset, because we are talking mindset here. And so what I find is that people come to me in one of three ways. One is they come in with that expert mindset. I'm an expert. I know what I'm talking about. Now, these people tend to be highly educated or highly skilled in something. They know their stuff. They come in often with whether it be an educational background or a strong experiential background, and they tend to be all about the facts, just the facts, man, just the facts. And so they're talking a lot about facts and data, and they don't want to go into that place of emotional connection because there's no place for emotions in business, right? Of course, we know that that's not true, but that is often where the expert comes in because they see that it might in some way diminish their credibility, which of course is not true, by the way, but there is the feeling of that because it has been trained out of them. These are often scientists, academics, technologists, leaders of very complex places. We see them in that expert category. The second place is what I call the change maker. Now, the change maker is often the expert just through the different lens. The change maker comes in all passion, all influence, all connection, so revved up about the thing it is that they know. They want you to know it. They want to influence you. They want to show you all the ways in which you can create impact if this thing were different or if there was a change or whatever it is that they're talking about. Now, often they have the same educational background. Often they have the same experiential background as the expert. It's just their come from place is emotional, influence driven versus factual, expert driven. And so these two people, and often they're the same person, flip-flopping. I didn't get connection when I was all facts and data. Now I'm going to try it all about emotion. And they flip-flop between changemaker and expert. The third person that comes in is what I call the connector. Now, this person, again, probably has the same background. They still have got lots of education. They still have lots of passion, but they're deep in imposter syndrome. And this is the person who's coming in and they get asked to be at the front of the room and they turn to Rosie and they say, Rosie, you're so much better than this, but I'll do the work for you, but I think you should get up. You're way better presenter than me. And in all three of those instances, the challenge with the mindset there is that we as the audience lose out because either we're being given a whole litany of facts and never really understanding the impact of those facts, or we're being given a whole lot of influence and never really being given the rationale why that influence is important, or we're not getting to hear it firsthand from the person who's actually doing the thinking and therefore never truly understanding what it is they believe. And because of that, those voices are never fully being heard and are never fully being represented. It's when you're able to take your influence and your knowledge, combine them together, that you step into that role of the thought leader. It's where others look at you and go, that's a person who really gets it, who really understands who they are and knows what they know and knows what they don't know. Because it's not about knowing everything. It's about showing up authentically, emotionally, and with the wisdom that you have and owning it and being comfortable when you don't know something and saying, you know what, that's great. Let me either get back to you or I'd love to let's debate that right now. Let's figure that out together. And a lot of times the biggest determinant of that is your ability to tell stories because it's the thing that connects facts and data and emotions.
Oh my gosh. Like I've already all these notes. Like, oh my gosh. We have to unpack this. I love all that. So we're gonna get into storytelling in a second, but I was laughing, like trying not to when you were talking about that the experts and the change makers can be the same person flip-flop. Because it got me thinking about, and even this whole idea of thought leadership. Because early on in my professional journey, like I think my tagline or bio or whatever would be like, known as a thought leader, challenging the status quo. And you start doing a lot of speaking at conferences first as breakout sessions and doing the freebies before you start getting hired for, well-paid keynotes and whatnot. And I share that because it is funny because I think about as I was challenging an industry. I was challenging the workplace wellness industry at the time of like, here we go. Like here's different data, here's research. So you do have to be backed. Like if you are challenging a paradigm, you've got to be backed with that data. And then that started to like, fine, make a name for yourself, et cetera. But then there is a bit of this imposter at the time of like, well, wait, who am I like to say this stuff? Or I know what doesn't work, but I don't know what does work yet. And so you're in this, I'm pulling from other people's research as a foundation, but we got to experiment. So you're trying to convince people, let's try it. Let's learn from each other. Let's break out of the mold type of a thing. And then there's this whole, well, okay, now I just got to get people excited, but it may or may not work, all that. And it's funny because when you talk about flip-flopping, what I learned is there was a period of time where I told stories and was all the human, whatnot. And then you start to feel this, oh, they need more data because people are going back and trying to convince their leaders. So then I would start going heavy on, okay, I have so well read and researched almost ad nauseum, here you go. And several years ago, one of my dear friends who's been on this podcast, her name is Rachel Druckenmiller. Rachel, I always tell this story, but it was funny because I was going to be speaking at this conference and we were writing our second book, Rehumanizing the Workplace, and she was contributing a section to it. And her and I chatted on the phone, and it was like a week before this conference. And I was like, I think it'd be really powerful to talk about your coaching journey with me. And like, do you want to come in and like have a part of this session? And so she's like, yeah. So we were trying to work through what we were going to do. And we were sitting there the morning of the session. And she looks at me, and this is where you got to have people who lovingly call you on your crap. And she called me out, I think, for being the expert mindset. She goes, before we even pull this up, let me guess, Rosie, you've got slide full of data after data after data after data. And I'm like, shit, yeah, I did. And she's like, but you're asking me, like, we're going to tell our human experience. And so I'm like, dang it. And so I pulled out like half of those slides. And the room was packed and it was amazing. And we told human stories. And so I share that because you can flip flop. And I even catch myself like now we're finishing our own unique research, but it took us years to get there. Right. And so it's like, well, here we go. We're going to have a different voice to say and a different way of looking at it. But it's doing it through a combination, right, of the stories and not like it's all about data. And so I just share it because I'm laughing. I'm like, I've seen this in myself and others flip flop. And what I always say to people, and the best like coaching advice I've gotten as a speaker, right, is making sure that you're very clear and deliberate about how you use stories. And I always say, we connect with people through storytelling, even if their experience is completely different than ours, it's connecting on a human level. And I think when we're insecure or when we're stuck in that expert mindset, or we're trying to prove ourselves, or we feel our voices don't matter, we stop telling our stories. And I think that's just such a missed opportunity. So let's talk about when you say storytelling is how we deliver messages, how we move into thought leadership, you can get beyond these mindsets that maybe aren't helpful. Like, talk to me more, like, what does that look like and how do we effectively leverage our story to have our voice have an impact?
Well, I love the story you just told because I think it's, again, humanizing, right? Like, your own experience of being the expert, of needing to be the expert for so many different reasons. There is nothing wrong with being an expert. And I want to make that clear. The challenge with the expert mindset, however, is that it does keep the audience away from you. And that was exactly what you were describing, right? That you had slides and slides and slides of data. Well, and I will bet because you had done the work, because you knew your stuff, what you were able to do by removing all of those slides was to go deeply into the story and, where necessary and where appropriate, pull in a stat or two that actually underpinned what you were saying. And that's the key, right? So that we're contextualizing the story with the facts and data. And so it's not just, oh, it's a story from my life. Yes, it is. And that's great because I can tell you that story. But I'm also going to tell you why I'm telling you that story. I'm giving you this little peek behind the scenes of what it's illustrating, what it's actually, giving us. And so when we think about storytelling in business, and again, we work with so many different business leaders, and it's the very first thing I hear is, I'll hear two things. One, oh yeah, I tell stories all the time. We have case study after case study. Case studies are not stories. Case studies are problem solution. That's a very different thing. Now, there's stories inside of the case study, but the case study is not a story. So that's number one. The second thing I hear is, well, I'm not going to tell a personal story in business. I mean, there's no place for that in business. Again, it's so wrong. And you said it, when I tell you my story, you hear your story, right? Stories are universal. As humans, we are hardwired for story. And there is actual brain science behind what happens when we are listening to a story and what happens to our brain. And so one of the biggest things and one of the biggest takeaways is that 60 to 70% of the information contained inside of a story is remembered by the listener. 60 to 70%. Now think about your last corporate presentation. 10%, 20% remembered, if you're lucky. Well, if you could use a story and get your audience to remember 70% of what you're telling them, doesn't that make sense for a business? And when you're telling your story, you're doing a couple of things. One, you're humanizing yourself, as you mentioned, but you're also actually helping the audience to be a part of what it is you're talking to them about. Because as I'm telling you my story, your brain is actually pulling up memories from your own life. And it's populating my story with your memories. And by doing that, you now align to what I'm telling you, if it's in alignment with who you are and what you believe. Now, if it's not, then that's a whole other thing. But really, when we're talking about, trying to create engagement with our audience, if I start off with a personal story that helps you to get to know me better, that helps you to remember something in your life that has a positive connection for you, and what that story does at the end is deliver an idea that you hadn't thought of. And now you're able to understand it because I've contextualized it with this story from my life, which you've aligned with. The likelihood of you not only remembering that idea, but also acting on it is way higher than if I had just said, hey, I've got this great idea. Can I take you through it? And so that's why story in business is so powerful, because it helps us to really focus in on the thing we want our audience to do. And the story acts as the context for it. And it is the thing that gets remembered.
Yeah, there's a stat that I learned several years ago, and I've been using it similar to the 60, 70%, which I love that one, but that stories are 22 times more memorable than facts and figures alone, to your point, not you remember more. And I love all that. There's, speaking of stories, it reminds me of with one of our clients, we went through this whole process with them to help them clarify their why or their purpose, and to also then like what their values are or their house, to use Simon Sinek's golden circle. And the process to articulate that, because at the time they were 100-year-old company. So in our book, we talk about like when a 100-year-old company finds its why. And it was done through storytelling. So it was asking people to sit in a room and share stories of when they've been the most proud to work there, whether they've worked there for a week or for 50 years. And it was the stories that people told, and it was nothing about their product or service. It was about the human connection and how they showed up for one another, and whether it was how they helped a customer or how they helped each other or how they came back from adversity when Mother Nature was pissed off, or how they care for their communities. But the common thread in all of those stories, when people said they were the most proud to work at this company, was related to this human connection, how they showed up and how they worked together. And that became part of their why. It's like working together. And I share that because whenever we get together with their culture ambassadors, because we support them a few times a year, whenever we get together with their leaders, we ask them to tell a new round of storytelling of, when have you seen our why in action? When have you seen our values in action? What's the impact that had on you? Bring it personal. Like, what did that do for you? And we do that because it emotionally reconnects them back to the company. And we keep telling them, we use a metaphor of a lighthouse, that storytelling is what keeps the lighthouse lit for people. And so when you're going through a massive change and you're trying to align people and people are frustrated because ABC, you can ground them back in that lighthouse by just doing a new round of storytelling. Or if you don't have one that you know of, or no one has one when you ask, keep one in your back pocket from one of these other meetings and share it. And like, oh, and so that's just a very tactical example of using storytelling to not just tell your story to business and have people excited, but it's also to like ground them back to, how do you make your purpose and values be a lived experience versus words on a website or words on a wall. Storytelling is massively powerful in doing that.
And what a beautiful exercise. You just inspired me. One of the things that we do with our clients is we do work with a lot of large corporate. And we have a program called Story Finding, where we help the organization find its story. And I'm working on a story finding project right now. And you just inspired me. There's some research involved in that, but there's also what we call a story finding day, where we bring together the senior leaders and a whole bunch of people from the organization. And we have this day of exercises. And I love that. And I think I might actually steal that, of like asking them to tell the story where they were most proud of their organization. Because, when we see our organization as a story, because it is, I'm a great reader. I love history, and I read a lot of historical books. But if you've read any of Yuval Harari's books, so *Sapiens* or *Homo Deus* or *21 Lessons for the 21st Century*, he's a historian. He's an Israeli historian, but he talks about how actually everything is story, and the corporation is a story. It's a story that we have legally sanctioned, literally, right? Because the corporation actually has a legal identity. And that legal identity is just the story that we've created for it. And so when we think about that, and the companies that we work for and the people we work with, everything about it is a story. And so when we choose to engage as stories, when we look at everything we're doing as a story, it gives us way more power to create the changes we want, because we can write the story at any point. And that's the power of story, is that we get to define it.
I love that. Well, yeah, like you think about it, how many times are there alternative endings for like movies or something, right? Or if you don't like the story, well, here's a blank page, like change it. And I love the way that you're positioning that, and what it brings up for me, which we'll be having a conversation about this in a few minutes. But one of the things that I regularly say, and I borrowed this from Brene Brown in the work that we do with her, I trained with her in 2019, is in the absence of data, our brains fill it in with story, because you said we are, as a species, and most of the time those stories are full of nonsense and crap and full of, innate need for self-protection and all that kinds of stuff. And so I think, if we're not going to be deliberate about telling the story we want to tell, someone else is going to tell it for us. And if we're not going to be deliberate to go, I don't like this narrative that is either being said about me or my company or my team or my project, or I don't like this narrative that I'm telling myself, well, then stop telling yourself that freaking story and write a new one, because you have that power. And I think we forget that we're telling ourselves a story, and we assume because we think it's fact and it's true, right? We think it's fact, it's the expert. But the reality is, no, it's a story. So change the story and see if you like a different story better that serves you and others. I love everything about that.
One of the things that I like to do, when I'm working with individuals on storytelling, and again, working with thought leaders, working with experts, one of the first things that we do is first of all, what is the idea you want to get out there, right? What is the underpinning of the story? Because stories are great, except stories, actually what they are great for is context. But what is it you want me to remember? Because that's what a story does, is it helps me to remember something. And so when we're working with an expert, first thing we do is we go, what's the idea? What's the thing you want to get the audience to remember? And we build that into a one-sentence statement. And the problem with ideas is that they're not very well understood by most people, because we say things like, oh, I have a great idea. And then a half an hour later, we're still describing it, right? And the problem with that is, of course, the person listening is like, I don't know where you're going with this. I'm lost, right? But this is where, if we can get our idea into this one sentence, what it does is it allows us to understand our own idea really, really well. And then it allows us to find a story to hold that idea, to be the context for it. But one of the things that I found, and you just described it, which is, in our head, we've got all these stories about ourselves, and we're not really all that aware of those stories. Or if we're aware of them, we're just letting it sort of loop, right? It's on autopilot. It's looping away. And one of the exercises that I do when we're crafting an idea, and you can do this about the story that's running in your head, is to get out a pen and paper and write it down. So write down what it is that you want to convey, or write down what it is, like all the elements of the story that's going through your head. Once you've written it down, give it to somebody else. So give that piece of paper to somebody else and have them read it back to you. Because the problem with this great brain that we all have these amazing brains that are trying to keep us safe, that are trying to give us all the information, that are trying to fill in all the blanks for us, is that when we have that information resident inside of our head, our brain is filling in blanks. It's giving us a bunch of information that we don't even know we're getting. But as soon as we put it down on paper and give it to somebody else, and now we hear it said back to us, it's no longer ours. And our brain is no longer filling in those blanks. And what happens is, for the first time, you're hearing your own idea or your own story said out loud to you. And suddenly you're like, well, I wouldn't say it that way. Well, that's not true. Well, that's not my idea. And it's interesting because you're the one who wrote it. But the problem is, now for the first time, you're hearing it. You're not thinking it. And it's a really powerful exercise to get it out of your head. And so, I'm not suggesting you write down all the nasty things that your brain is saying to you, because sometimes it can be a little bit, over the top in terms of trying to keep you safe by telling you that you're less than, right? Because that's what it's doing. It's trying to keep you safe, right? And so therefore it's giving you all the negative connotations that thinks it will scare you. But if you've got a story going on that you're not good enough, let's say, I don't have enough training to be in front of the room. Write that down. As soon as you write it down, you're going to go, well, that's not true. Or, well, that's true, but it doesn't matter, right? Because that's the thing. As soon as we get it out of our head, it's not so scary.
I love that. And I would say there's actually an exercise that we do. I love the idea, depending on what the story is, of give it to someone else, have them read it. It's the beauty of coaching. When you hear your voice say it out loud, it's different than when it's in your head. But when we see it or hear it, it is different. And there's an exercise that we do, again, I'm just going to say from the Dare to Lead curriculum. And it's one of the skill sets of courage that Brene Brown talks about in some of her books of Learning to Rise. And she calls it the SFD, the shitty first draft. And it's where you put out there, and it is wait a second, and when you look at it on paper, and usually those SFDs magnify our fears and the worst things about ourselves. But when you look, and I tell people, get it out of your head, put it on paper, and you don't have to share it, right? The SFDs are usually for you, but you look at it and you're like, okay, is this what I really think? This makes no sense. And with the way that we describe it in the courage building work is, when we see it, we are far less likely to act on it, because we're like, this makes no sense. Or we now can go fact check it. Well, how can I find out if this is true? Or with the imposter thing, I was talking with some leaders lately, and, they're having that whole, well, I don't know. And, they're going to figure me out. And so then I just flipped it and I said, well, do you respect that leader? Do you respect that person? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, so what if you tried on an alternative story that every time you say, oh, they shouldn't have put me there, they're going to figure it out, you're actually being completely disrespectful to that person because you're questioning their judgment and thinking that they're full of crap. And they're like, oh, I never thought of that way. I go, so every time you do that, you're actually being disrespectful of their character, their judgment, their decision-making. And they just go, oh crap, I never thought of it that way. I'm like, well,
yeah.
So,
I remember having years ago being in therapy and learning that lesson, about respect of other people, trying to do work for them. And it's like, well, now you're telling them that they can't do it themselves. You're disrespecting them. Right. And it's so true. When we do this in relationships, oh, I'll just do that for you because you're so busy. Well, now you're saying to that person, they don't have the time. They don't know how to do it, or, whatever it is, whatever story. And I mean, they're powerful. That message about respect is so, so, so powerful. And, one of the things that came to mind when you're talking about the shitty first draft, I remember reading that in Brene Brown's book. It's such a great, and because it is true, until we get it out of our head, it's sitting there just, it's ruminating, right? But today we've got these great tools called AI. And the shitty first draft can be your instructions to your AI. This is one of the things that you can actually now use, is take that and have the AI help you to turn it into what you really want. Get it out as a prompt. And now have AI show you what it actually could be. And I think there's just such value these days in using all of these tools that we've got to get outside of our head, and to get that voices in our head to quiet a little bit so we can actually do the thinking we want to. And I love having AI as a thought partner, and I use it all the time as a thought partner. It doesn't do my writing for me, but it helps me think.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, we're still tiptoeing. My chief experience officer uses it way more than I do. But what I regularly say that I love about it is that when we use it well, it frees us up as human beings to do the stuff that only us as humans can do. And there is something where, obviously it's only as good as the inputs that go in and all of that stuff. And like anytime you're using it, you have to have human oversight. So it's okay, here, take transcript from a podcast and now we could turn it into a blog. Well, you're going to go through and not going to do it like it is. Like, I don't like how you did this. That's not my voice. That's not how we would say things, but it gets you started and you can refine in an eighth of the time than starting a blog from scratch.
And that's it. Right. And we learn from it too, right? Because that's a good example of the expert to thought leader, right? Where the expert is all about the technical data, right? These are the facts that will go into changing our future and go through all the technical jargon. And the AI will come back with something that is more understandable, but not dumbed down. And that's really important, right? And so the expert is learning from the AI in that case of like, okay, what's the translation of what I'm saying? So that they can become more fluent in that. Again, it's not that the AI is doing their work for them, but it's helping. It's like a translator of sorts. And so, these are like, I think it's one of the most important things when we think about mindset is the curiosity to be open to what is next. So, things like AI, it's a tool. That's all it is. It's a tool. And so when we're curious about the tool and we're open to what it can give us, we actually grow. And we can grow into that thought leadership through using these tools, through being open to experiment, to be wrong. Like when you're on stage and somebody asks you a question or challenges what you've just said, you can get angry or you can get curious. And I think, those who are really successful get curious and go, wow, I never thought of it that way. Tell me more. And now you're learning and they're learning and you get seen as that thought leader because you are open to not defend your position, but to learn from somebody else. And that's really key in stepping into your thought leadership.
Yeah, curiosity is a hallmark of anything in life, I feel like, right? We really would benefit from being more curious. And so I think that's a great segue into, we've been talking about mindset and the stories we tell ourselves. And you talk a lot about the importance of perspectives and recognizing, because so often we have that thought, we have that SFD, we have that story, and we don't realize that we've created it. We think we're subject to it. We feel beholden to it. But you talk about how, if we are really clear about our different perspectives shape our mindset, we can actually control and shift it more than we realize. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I think as you start to surface what you actually think, because I think one of the biggest challenges that most of us have is that, again, we've got these big brains that are filling in all the blanks, or that we just know what we know intuitively and we don't know why, or we don't know how we know it. And so we tend to discount it. And we then need to go deep into the facts, right? That's what, I mean, look, I spent many years as a researcher. And, I know the desire to go deep into the facts because it can be really interesting. You're learning. But the problem with that is that we're never really synthesizing what we know. And that's one of the things that I think story really helps us do. Over the years, as I've worked with so many different thought leaders, is that every time I sit down with somebody and I, the first thing we do is we go into their idea. What is it you want to convey? What do you want your audience to take away? And I always say, look, you get one thing, that's it. Nothing else, one thing. If they can only remember that one thing, what is it? And that's hard, right? Because you're like, well, I have many things. And I'm like, yes, you probably do. And those many things ladder up to one thing. So let's find the one thing. So that in and of itself, just doing that exercise of trying to take all the things you want to say to your audience, all the ways in which you want to impact the people that you're talking to, and turn it into one idea. That will help you grow. And the way that you do that is by really getting clear on a couple of things. One is, what is the topic that you speak on? What is generally the thing that people go, oh, well, she's about this. So, you talk about, and you said it earlier, about sort of HR and the impact of leadership within organizations, right? So looking through the lens of human resources and leadership. So that might be a topic for you. And there's lots of people who talk in that topic, and that may not even be clear or right for you, but doesn't matter right now. Let's just say for sake of argument. And so it's something that people go, oh, I know what that is. And that's important. So having a topic is important. You don't need to differentiate on a topic. You just need to have a topic. Choose one. There's 1,000 of them, millions of them probably. And so choose a topic. Now, where you can get really, really clear is the next piece, which is your point. Now, your point on that topic is what only you know. And you know that because of maybe your training, maybe your experience, maybe your culture, maybe your stories. Like there could be 1,000 reasons why you know what you know. And it's unique to you. It might be the research you've done. But you're the only one who knows that thing about that topic. And so when you put the topic and the point together, what you've got is an idea, the basis of an idea. And these are really your what and your how. That's really what those are. Your what is your topic, your how is your point. But for the speaker, that can feel really complete, but it's not about you, it's about your audience. And so with the audience, what they want to know is, why does this matter? Why is it important? And that's your result, that's your outcome. And your why, your impact statement. So you know, when you put your topic, your point, and your impact statement together, you've got an idea. And really what that is a what, a how, and a why. And so these are the places where, as individuals, when we're trying to get clear, we find the place we can go to by building out this thought so that we can build everything else around it. It becomes the North Star for anything we're talking about, for the thought leadership we're putting out there in the world, for the ways in which we're interacting with our peers. That can be a defining place. I mean, it can be smaller than that, but when you are stepping into a leadership role, and specifically a thought leadership role, defining your knowledge in that way is really helpful. And then it gives you a starting point for 100 different other talks, because it always ladders back to that one idea. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, it makes total sense. And my brain is going a million miles an hour. I mean, for me personally, I'm like, yeah, this makes sense when you think about like speaking and writing and whatnot. But when I think about, someone who's listening that might be thinking about, how do I even position my resume to stand out differently and I'm job seeking? Or how do I position, my LinkedIn profile? I mean, so it got me thinking more broadly, because you said, right, we can have our influence and impact and be a thought leader with one person or with a bunch. And maybe someone who's listening right now is, I have no desire to speak in front of a group, but it got me thinking, my gosh, I'm trying to sell myself within an organization, or I'm trying to sell myself to my boss or my leader or to my peers or to a customer. So I love that thing, because you do think about, I mean, work we've done on our business over the past year is to continue to get clear. It's the whole what differentiates you and what sets you apart from every other organization that works on culture and leadership and, mindset. And so doing that work to get really clear of what is it, what makes us different. And, we landed on, well, we fundamentally help upskill leaders and teams to better navigate the messiness of being human in the face of change, to work through change and disruption. And right. And so the talks I give around leadership, culture, change, et cetera, you're right, it all kind of comes back to that. But that's where we get stuck, because we make up stories, we fall back on habits, our self-protective brain kicks in. And so anyway, so we're in the process of refining our website and stuff. But I think that clarity from a business, if you're trying to sell yourself against other candidates in the job market, if you're trying to break into speaking, it's like come up with the one thing. Like that's what's coming up for me, is all the different intersection points where getting that level of clarity is golden and will set you apart in whatever level you want to be set apart. But you got to do the work to get that clarity.
You got to do the work. And, just even in listening to what you're saying, like, I mean, you've got it. You've got your what, you've got your how. I would challenge you to say, what happens when you achieve that? What's the why? What's the outcome?
We rehumanize workplaces. The why is we rehumanize workplaces, right?
Right. And I would even go a bit deeper, because what does rehumanizing workplaces mean? Like, because, the thing about it is, it's about creating that impact piece, right? When you rehumanize the workforce, I would think what happens is you create humans who are more productive, who are happier, and who show up more creatively, right? And so because of that, like, wow, I want that.
Yeah. We always say people can bring their best selves to work and home each day. Like if you're freeing them up. But yeah, I love that. So, oh yay, we're on the right track. Woohoo.
Yeah. And I think, I think this is where like you said, most of us struggle, right? It's hard. Like, I do this all the time for other people. It's hard for me to do it for myself. And so I work with my own coaches sometimes when I'm writing my own talks because it makes sense for me to go, look, I don't know where, I was doing a talk not too long ago and I was actually working with 4 speakers for the same week that I was giving a talk. And it was like, okay, this is where neurodiversity is not helpful because I was like, okay, I took on way too much because my ADD brain was like, oh yeah, I can do it. And I'm like, okay, not really. But, I sat down with my one of my coaches and I was like, look, I think I know what I'm talking about, but I can't figure out how to actually contain it in a story. And he was great. Like what was powerful about it was it was just those little tweaks, right? Where it's like you can know it and then you've got somebody outside of you saying it back to you. And, he was like, here's what I heard. Here's what I think you should do. And here's where I think you should start the story. And it was enough that I was like, I got it. I got it right now. Like, and I mean, I do this all the time. And so, I think no matter who you are, don't beat yourself up when you think that this should be easy. It's never easy. It's not. It's not meant to be because these are important things. But there are tools that you can use. And I think that's one of the benefits. And, happy to give your audience access to our tools, which we have a storytelling toolkit that happy to make that available to them just so that they can, it gives you all of these, little frameworks that help you to create an idea or tell a story or build a talk that has a story in it. And I think those are helpful.
I love that. So we're going to get presents, y'all. So if you're listening to this, you got to go to the episode page because we're going to link to Storytelling Toolkit. And I will tell you, I'm selfish. Like I always say any good athlete has a coach. Any good coach has a coach, right? If someone thinks they're beyond coaching or when we're working with our clients and you have a leader who thinks they're above development, that's a huge red flag because we all need help getting out of our own way. So thank you for that, selfishly for that gift. But listeners, like go get the toolkit for sure. So speaking of stories, this is a really good segue. As I mentioned, one of the things that besides our business that I'm personally obsessed with is normalizing the messiness of being human. Because as we've been talking about, we are messy creatures. And so what I've been learning through my research and the work that we do is no matter how much work we've done on ourselves, we all still tell ourselves these self-limiting stories out of self-protection. And so what I would love in the spirit of storytelling, Andrea, what is a self-limiting story that you still tell yourself sometimes? And when it shows up, how do you move beyond it so that you can still show up as a leader in your life and have the impact that you want to have?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I just told this story a couple of weeks ago. I was at a retreat for female entrepreneurs. And I've been a member of this particular community for about 5 years. And when I first was invited to be a part of it, I actually was invited to come to the retreat as a speaker. And, at the time, my business, I was about 5 years into my business and I had a business partner, a male. And when I started this business, I had come out of the ad world. I was in advertising. I was a senior vice president of strategy, and I'd had a very bad experience where I got burned out and through a series of unfortunate events ended up on stage humiliated by my boss. I started having panic attacks in front of audiences. And so here I was owning a company that was all about public speaking. I was working with TED speakers. And my dirty little secret was that I couldn't get up on a stage because I was terrified I was going to have a panic attack. And I didn't have the language for it in those days. I didn't know that that's what it was. I just thought that there was something wrong with me. And so fast forward 5 years, I'm into my business, and the business partner I had chosen was somebody who loved being on stage. And I thought, great, he loves being on stage. I can be behind the scenes and I can build the business and he can be the face of the business. All good, right? Except that's not really true. Because here's the thing. As, somebody building thought leaders, my voice needed to be heard too. And my clients wanted my voice to be heard and the world needed my voice to be heard. And I didn't want to believe that. And therein lied some of the limiting beliefs. I don't have a formal background or education. I never graduated university. I have all of these things in my background that make it look as if I don't have the skill set to do what I do, except I'm really, really good at what I do. And I wasn't willing to own that. And I wasn't willing to own my own knowledge and expertise because my brain, that imposter syndrome, was telling me that I didn't have what it takes. And so on that day that I was asked to do this talk in front of these amazing female entrepreneurs who I still was not even believing I was one of them. And yet I was being asked to be in front of that audience. And I gave that talk and I had probably, and I look back now, I over prepared and I did all the work, which is important because you have to do the work. And I got up and I told the story about how I had shifted my life and started my business and changed my career and started this public speaking business and all in service of living a vibrant life. And, I got amazing, amazing feedback from it, except I couldn't hear any of it. And it took me 5 years to really, really be able to embrace that. And this, like I said, I just came back from this retreat a couple of weeks ago, and I was again speaking at this retreat. And I speak often at this particular one, but this year I kind of owned up to that. And I said, like I was deep in imposter syndrome and I couldn't hear and I couldn't see myself as one of you. And it's really only been in the last year that I've really sort of stepped into myself and my own thought leadership. And I still struggle with it. It is something that today, because of the fact that I don't have formal education, because of the fact that I don't have any of the markers that society tells me I should have to be in the role that I'm in, I still sometimes question myself, but I'm getting better and I'm learning. And I think one of the things that we do is that we teach what we most need to learn. And so I'm teaching myself through the very work that I'm doing. And I'm okay with that because I think the people who work with and for me, they get it too. We're all learning together. And so that's a little bit about me and my journey to being a thought leader.
I love everything you share. So thank you for that. And especially the last thing, I always say to people, like selfishly, all of the tools that we use in our workshops and our coaching and our culture work, selfishly, like I lean on them. And I always say, make no mistake, just because some of these tools I've literally been using for 15 or 20 years because they work, but I also use them when my humanity gets the best of me to get back in alignment. So if anyone pretends they don't need this stuff, like run away. But I'm like, no, like you use them. Like, so it is kind of like it's the stuff we need to learn or we need to remind ourselves. And so, woohoo, yay. So thank you.
Exactly.
I love it.
And I love watching who shows up because I think, we attract from where we are. And so it's always such a beautiful lesson in humility to see the people who you have around you. So like if you're wondering where you are in your own thought leadership and your own impact, just look around you because all of those people who are in your experience are really mirrors for who you are. And so it can be quite humbling.
100%, 100%. All right. That is a really great segue into quick questions. Are you ready?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Andrea, fill in the blank. Living authentically is?
Living authentically is choosing to show up from where I am every day, no matter where that place is.
Yes. That is like quotable moment right there. Love it. When the world is presenting an opening, but you don't feel like showing up as a leader, what do you do?
I take a deep breath and I remind myself, I have chosen this. And so, yes, it may be more work than it needs to be because I'm in my own way, but I got this and I know I can show up as the leader that I am. And so it can be hard, but that deep breath, breathe is always the number one lesson.
That is fantastic. There is something about our breath. We could go into the whole science about it, but there we go. What is something people would be surprised to know about you?
Well, I mean, I shared it earlier. I actually don't have any formal education. I dropped out of high school in grade 10, and I did graduate as a secretary when I was 18. So that's my only true formal education. Everything else is either, informal courses or experience. And it has been, I think in many ways, it's the only way I could have actually succeeded. I don't think education, and not that I have anything against it, it's the way my brain works. I need to do. And so I am self-taught.
I will just as a side, I love that because I work with a lot of leaders who are neurodivergent in various ways, and they talk about, the challenges. And, as someone who obviously has multiple degrees, like my brain works differently than yours. And I think if we talk about inclusivity and diversity and equity, we also have to have that for how people learn. And our systems are not set up right now very well to help people whose brains think differently succeed because of the way it's structured. So I love that you have formed your path and are like really setting a stage and putting a story out there of, hey, there is more than one way to learn, to grow, and to be successful. So fan-freaking-tastic. It's like, yay. Okay. What is your favorite go-to movie?
I am not, again, ADD. I'm not a movie person. But what I love, actually, I was going to say, actually, I love things that are short. And then the thing that popped into my mind is Lord of the Rings. Not short.
Which is not short.
Not short at all. But I love a good quest where it's like, so I love the Lord of the Rings. I love those types of fantasy type movies where I can follow along and be part of the characters. And it's the same for books. Like I always loved a good series. Give me a 20-book series. I am like all in. But it's where I can kind of like drop in and drop out too, right? So where if I need to take a break, I can, and there's not a whole lot of stress in it. So that's the other thing. I anything that's got too much drama, I cannot watch.
Love it. All right, what's something you can't live without?
Oh, I hate to say it, but it's true. My phone. It is my repository for everything. I was actually talking to a friend yesterday, and I think what I've come to realize in my life, what my phone is for me is like I put everything in it. Like I keep all of my notes in there. I put, if I'm writing intentions, they're on my phone. I like to have everything in one place, and my phone is the one place that it's the one thing that's always with me because it actually has my credit cards in it too. And so, so I can leave the house and I never have to have a pen, a piece of paper. Everything I need is in my phone. For me, it's a thought partner, and I have everything I need there. Listen to my books. I listen to lots of books. I listen to podcasts. So yeah, my phone. Well, and my cats. My cats too. I couldn't live without my cats.
Phone and your cats. I like it. Well, that's a good segue into next question. What is something in your ordinary daily life that makes your heart happy?
Oh, my cats. My cats and my daughter. They're my family. And I live alone now. My daughter is grown, so I don't see her as much as I would like to. And so my two little fur babies are here with me every day. And, if I'm having a bad day, it's amazing at how just touching their fur will change your whole day. Kind of puts you back into perspective. And then the other thing is looking out and seeing the beauty of nature. I live in the woods practically, and it's so beautiful to look out and see nature and be experiencing nature. And these days, the aurora, which is incredible with all of the different auroras that we've been getting because of our sun activity.
That's awesome. And what are you grateful for right now?
I'm grateful for my life. I'm always grateful for my life. I think we live in such incredible times, and I know it feels difficult and challenging at times when we look out into our world, but like, wow, I get to live in this time, in this amazing incarnation of humanity. And I know that generations later we'll be looking back saying, I wonder what it was like to live through those times. And we get to live in them. And I am so incredibly grateful to be here, to be of service, and to offer what I offer to the world so that, in some way I can have some small part in creating that future that I hope we're all creating together.
I love that perspective. And speaking of creating a future, one last question. Andrea, if you could challenge leaders everywhere to practice this one behavior that would create more human workplaces and equip everyone to show up as a leader, what would that be?
To show up every day and ask the people who work with and for you to tell them one story about their lives. Every day, somebody else, ask for a story and just listen. Listen with your heart, listen with your mind, listen with your body, and hear what that person is really saying. Because when we get to know people as humans, we change the way we see them.
Perfect way to end it. I love this. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for the work that you're doing and even challenging my thinking. I love it. Much, much, much gratitude, Andrea. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rosie. This has been absolutely one of my favorite conversations I've had in a very long time.
I'm Rosie Ward, and this is Show Up as a Leader. To learn more, head over to peopleforwardnetwork.com and, of course, hit that follow button.